Hey everybody, today we're out in the forest with my favorite BMW 3 Series model. This is the 330e. This is the plug-in hybrid version of the BMW 3 Series. Every European car manufacturer has pledged an all-electric future, but BMW is charting a slightly different course to that same destination versus Mercedes and Audi. They've actually been pulling back more severely on the number of plug-in hybrids in favor of dedicated platform electric vehicles. In addition to still having some plug-in hybrids on offer in North America, BMW also has charted a different course to that final electric future, with vehicles like the BMW i7 and the upcoming BMW i5 and of course the i4 being electrified versions or electric versions of existing vehicles or the next generation platform vehicles. So if you'd like a 7 Series and an electric 7 Series, we have that in the BMW lineup. It's only a matter of time until we get an electric 3 Series. There's also already an electric 4 Series. Whereas in the Mercedes lineup, they're reinventing the wheel. They have a regular S-Class, and then they have an electric EQS. They have a regular E-Class, they have an electric EQE. It's only a matter of time until we get an EQC. So as we take a look around this BMW 330e, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Should BMW be going in the same direction rather than what we expect to see from them, which would be some sort of electric version of the 3 Series coming in its next generation? Or should they continue staying the course and give us, again, an electric and a gasoline version of the 5 Series, perhaps a plug-in hybrid at some point as well, electric plug-in hybrid and gasoline versions of the 7 Series? I prefer the way BMW is going about this. Although we don't have an all-electric 3 Series, I like the fact that the 330e looks just like a regular 3 Series. We have the same BMW LED headlights here, we have the same active grille shutters, and same waterfall-style grille that we find in the rest of the 3 Series lineup. Really, the only external differentiation between this and a regular 330 is going to be the blue badging around the BMW logo up front. BMW's grille designs have caused a bit of controversy lately, but in the refresh of this model, it's basically the same 3 Series under the skin since 2019, but in 2023 it does get a new look. It does not adopt the buck-toothed beaver thing that we find in some of the BMW lineup. Although to be honest, I'm not really offended by the beavery look. What's most interesting about the 330e specifically is that the competitive set is incredibly tiny in North America. It's basically just the Volvo S60 Recharge, which is their plug-in hybrid. But the two vehicles chart very different paths to electrification. This is trying to be basically a 330 performance-wise with some electric capability, whereas the Volvo S60 Recharge is the ultimate performance Volvo, 455 horsepower, and its 0 to 60 time is closer to the BMW 340i. Price-wise, they're not too far off, although the Volvo can get significantly more expensive than this if you opt for the Polestar engineered version. Although it's always possible that they'll bring it back, Mercedes no longer offers a plug-in hybrid version of the C-Class in the US, and there have been some rumors that we're going to see an AMG plug-in hybrid from them at some point in the future, but it's certainly not going to be the same sort of thing as this, and we don't find a plug-in hybrid A4 or, of course, a plug-in hybrid Lexus IS. Critical dimensions have not changed since this generation launched in 2019, but again, we do get the exterior refresh. We have full LED taillights back here, LED backup lights right there in the middle, red turn signals on the outside there. I like the fact that we still have exhaust tips on the 330e, and if you're familiar with the Volvo S60, in its last exterior refresh, they deleted the visible exhaust tips, tucked them up under the bumper, because they want things to be more harmonious with their electric vehicles and their gasoline vehicles. This is a plug-in hybrid, so it can run on electricity, which is why we get the E there, but it's still a gasoline car, and I like the fact that we still get the dual exhaust tips. As far as the design goes, I like the restrained front end that we find in the Volvo, but I like the rear end design of the 3 Series better. The architecture of the BMW and the Volvo plug-in hybrid systems is quite different. In the Volvo, we have essentially a front-wheel drive drivetrain with a high-horsepower 2-liter turbo. Produces about 300 horsepower, sends its power directly to the front wheels mechanically. There's also a motor in there generating power for the motor in the back. It's about a 155 horsepower e-axle on the rear. In the BMW system, it's essentially the same drivetrain that we find in a BMW 330i, with an electric motor sandwiched between the engine and the 8-speed automatic transmission. So if you get the all-wheel drive version of the 330e, it uses a regular mechanical all-wheel drive system that's going to feel and behave just like the one in the 330i. The 2-liter turbo itself is more of an efficiency-focused tune than the 2-liter turbo that you find in the 330i, though. So this engine in its own right produces about 181 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque, When combined with the electric motor between the engine and transmission, you get a total of 288 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque. So certainly a lower horsepower plug-in hybrid system than we find in the Volvo, because if you want more oomph, there's the 340i or an M3. And in the Volvo lineup, the plug-in hybrid is all you get. The traction motor connected to the transmission is rated for 107 horsepower, and it pulls its power from a 12 kilowatt-hour battery pack located in the trunk. That gives this 22 miles of EV range if you choose the rear-wheel drive model, 20 miles of EV range if you choose the all-wheel drive model. Because of the position of the electric motor, power is always flowing through the 8-speed automatic transmission. So even in electric-only operation, the transmission is going to be shifting up gears, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you accelerate, etc. That definitely gives this a different feel than some plug-in hybrids like that Volvo. Charging the electric battery is an onboard 3.7 kilowatt AC level 2 charger that will take this from 0 to completely full in about 3 hours. And if you have only access to 110 volt charging, then it's going to take about 11 or 12 hours to completely charge. This is the kind of vehicle where you don't need a level 2 charger if you don't want to go through that expense at home. You should be able to plug this into any old electrical outlet in your garage. After a week of driving the 330e, I found the front seats to be pretty comfortable. Here are the controls down here. We have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, a manual thigh cushion extension. It does go out pretty far. And as you can see, not terribly aggressive bolstering there on the midsection of that seat back. We also have 4-way adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger. A tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. You'll notice that over here on the turn signal stalk, this is where we find the trip computer buttons. Headlight controls are over there on that side. As I've noted in the past, one issue for the 3 Series continues to be rear seat legroom. You can see with this seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, my knees have maybe about 1/4 of an inch distance between that seat back and themselves. We also have a fairly aggressive hump in all models because, of course, this is a rear-wheel drive sedan, so the drive shaft has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is right there. We have 3-zone automatic climate control with USB charge ports back there. And of course, if you don't get the plug-in hybrid model, this console is exactly the same. The rear seats also do not change for the plug-in hybrid. And for me, at least, that's a good thing because headroom is pretty generous back here. You can see that even with my head back there on the headrest, I have about 1/2 inch of headroom left. A lot of the entries in the compact luxury segment have gone for a really swoopy roofline or large panoramic moonroofs, and those generally cut down on headroom. So this is certainly going to be more comfortable for taller passengers in the rear, as long as their legs aren't too long. Because this plug-in hybrid uses the same engine and same all-wheel drive system as the non-plug-in hybrid 3 Series, they couldn't put the battery where Volvo did, which is the driveline tunnel between the front and the rear. That means the battery has to go back here in the trunk, and the trunk does shrink as a result. Trunk capacity is a little bit difficult to talk about because it doesn't look like BMW and Volvo are measuring the trunk using the same measurement standard. Because in our 24-inch roller bag test, we got the same amount of luggage in the 3 Series and in the Volvo S60. And in this model, we actually have a slightly smaller trunk because this floor actually has a ratchet mechanism to allow you to lower it to the position where you can maximize the cargo area or raise it up to a position that is level with the battery in the back. The result is an oddly shaped cargo area if the floor is down, and certainly more of a cargo slot if the floor is up. On the other hand, BMW has retained the eminently practical 40-20-40 folding rear seat back rather than a 60-40 design or a simple ski pass-through. A large portion of this interior has not been touched for 2023, so we still have a slightly larger than average moonroof, but it's not a panoramic design. You can see it extends to just beyond the B-pillar, but not all the way back there to the rear seat passengers. The driver and front passenger in this model get fixed height shoulder belts and 4-way adjustable headrests. Very attractive and very comfortable seats for the driver and front passenger. The bolstering is not overly aggressive on the seat back and seat bottom cushions. If you want something more aggressive, of course, we have the M3. We have an extending thigh cushion down there for the driver and front passenger, and lots of soft touch materials on the front doors and on the dashboard, just as you'd expect. We have a sort of foam backing on this injection molded upper section of the door, and then just a covering over the harder plastics down there to dress them up but still improve durability. Moving over to the dashboard, of course, soft touch materials, and the big change is the big dual screen infotainment system. This is the latest version of BMW's iDrive setup with a heavily configurable instrument cluster over here and obviously full screen Apple CarPlay integration right there in the center of that screen. Dual zone climate controls are integrated into BMW iDrive rather than having physical buttons down there. We have reworked air vents down there, some physical controls for the system. These are touch buttons for track forward, backward, an actual volume knob and power knob there. Down here we have a Qi wireless charging mat, which is too small to actually fit my phone and charge it. The charging mat just won't turn on. We have two decently sized cup holders there, 12-volt power outlet, controls for the drivetrain down here, sport, hybrid, electric mode, auto brake hold, electric power brake right there. Start, stop there. This button right here enables the battery hold or the battery charging mode if you want to do that. We have the controller for the iDrive system, so you can either touch it or use the controller, your choice. This particular model has the metal trim on the dashboard. I do like the 3 Series with wood trim, however. We have a reasonable amount of storage capacity right here in the center console, more than you find in the S60 Recharge because this is where the Volvo puts the battery, but less than you'll find in most of the regular front-wheel drive competition because, of course, the transmission is living under this tunnel. And speaking of that, there is one reality that you should keep in mind if you are cross-shopping this with the Volvo. Again, it's the most direct competitor in North America. Because we do actually have a transmission here, the transmission tunnel flares out more into the footwell space on both the driver and front passenger side. So even though this center console seems a little bit less bulky than the one in the Volvo, it is actually wider. It's just not quite as tall. So you get a little bit less footroom there in the footwells. Again, over here on the driver's side, we have that full color LCD instrument cluster. We also have an attractive full color heads-up display, of course projected on the windshield just as you'd expect. The typical BMW steering wheel here with paddles on the back, controls for the adaptive cruise control and aggressive lane centering software there, heated steering wheel control, and then the controls for that multifunction LCD, as well as some additional controls for the infotainment system. One of the things that I love about this version of iDrive is that this is one of the very few systems available that offers 2-screen Apple CarPlay projection. So this map right there in the instrument cluster is actually an additional projection from CarPlay right here in the middle. So you can CarPlay nav while you're also doing something else with CarPlay. Before we get this out on the road, there's one more thing I should talk about. The 330e is available with essentially the same options list as the 330i. There are only some very minor changes. And that means that we can get the M Sport package here with the M Sport brakes, the M Sport wheels, and grippier, wider tires. This has a staggered tire setup, 225s up front, 255s in the rear. This is definitely a bit different than we find in the only direct competitor in this segment, the Volvo S60. In the S60 T8, you get 235 with tires all the way around, but it is heavier than the 330e, so no additional width in the back of that Volvo. And the tire choice is a little bit less grippy than the one that we have here. This is a Bridgestone Turanza tire on this particular model. You can also get the 330e with the same adaptive suspension system that we find in the 330i, of course retuned to the extra weight and dynamic profile of the 330e. And you can't get electronically controlled adjustable dampers on any version of the S60. The S60 Polestar Engineered can have an adjustable suspension, but it's a manual adjustable suspension. It's a little bit funky. Be sure and check out that video if you're interested in it. The first thing to know about the 330e out on the road is that the electric motor does give us enough torque to climb hills in electric-only mode, but it's not going to be especially swift 0 to 60 if you want to stay in this electric-only drive mode. In my initial 0 to 60 testing, it was a little bit tricky to actually get this number, but it was about 11 seconds to get this from 0 to 60 staying in the electric-only mode. Remember, we have about 100 horsepower or so from the battery pack. BMW gives you a blue line on the power gauge to help you stay in electric-only operation. And the blue line's position changes based on whether we're in the electric mode or we're in the hybrid mode. If I move down here to the hybrid mode, then the engine is going to turn on a little bit earlier. We'll stay in electric-only mode right now until about 25% based on the battery state of charge. Then the gasoline engine will kick in. I should also talk about the drive modes here for just a moment. We have a battery hold mode, which allows me to maintain the battery charge, stay right where I am, but not charge the battery. Now that makes a lot of sense because you don't really want to charge the battery from the gasoline engine. That's going to be less efficient than just driving this as a hybrid. In previous versions of BMW's plug-in hybrid technology, they have given us an ability to charge the battery, but it appears to be missing now for 2023. There's no way to adjust that level. If I hit that hold button, it's just going to hold me at whatever charge I already have. Sport mode, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to be a little bit jumpier on the throttle, the suspension, the steering, everything is going to be tuned for the sportiest drive. I can also choose extra boost, where I'm going to get even more oomph from the battery and the electric motor a little bit more readily. Of course, full throttle acceleration is the same in essentially any of these drive modes. We also get a tachometer up here on the instrument cluster rather than the power gauge. Then we have the hybrid mode, which is one of the more efficient driving modes. This is going to balance the power source for the most efficient driving at the moment. That may not always be electric. But in hybrid mode, it is going to be pulling power from the battery even if the gasoline engine is running, as long as there's charge left back there. So if you have, say, a 50-mile commute, put it in hybrid mode, you're going to end up with a drained battery by the time you get there, and the most efficient driving theoretically possible. If you want to stay in electric mode longer, then that's the electric mode there, and that's going to really try and keep you in that EV mode, even when it might be more efficient to run the gasoline engine. Now, as far as the performance numbers go, 0 to 60, again, in electric-only mode, about 11 seconds. In hybrid mode, or even in electric mode, if I just floor it, 0 to 60 happens in 5.4 seconds. That is a little bit quicker than BMW's stated time of 5.6, and right in line with the 330i. On the other hand, that's about 1.5 seconds slower than the most natural competitor, which would be the Volvo S60. Obviously, that has more power, 455 horsepower. But the way this feels out on the road is very different from that Volvo. And I'll give you an example right here. So say I slow down and I floor it right here around this corner. Then we start turning the steering wheel. There's no torque steer. In fact, we get a little bit of rear end steering back there. That's because this is a rear power biased vehicle. It can almost completely disconnect the front axle if it wants to, send nearly 100% power to the rear. Of course, if you get the rear wheel drive model, all the power is always going to the rear. And in the Volvo, you will get torque steer under acceleration because 300 horsepower and about 300 pound-feet of torque is going right there to the front axle. About 155 horsepower is going to the rear. Now, what's unusual about that Volvo setup is because it does have a reasonable amount of torque, if I were to, say, go up this hill and goose it a little bit, you'll actually get some rear end steering in the Volvo just like this, but it's accompanied by the torque steer that you do not get in the BMW. Now, the next thing to know when it comes to handling ability going a little bit out of order here is that because this has that battery pack in the rear, it is a little bit rear end heavy compared to the regular 3 Series. You won't notice it too often. You'll notice that the steering can feel sometimes a little bit lighter. It's a little bit more willing to turn in compared to the 330i, although 330i is actually fairly light up front still. But more noticeable is that if you're really seesawing the steering wheel, say in really narrow switchbacks, etc., you can feel a little bit of a pendulum effect back there with the heavier weight in the battery. Personally, I don't think that's a problem in the 330e, and you do have to be driving it pretty hard to notice it, and driving it back to back with a 330i, but it is still present. All in all, this is a very composed package. Driving dynamics-wise, this is superior to the S60. The steering feel, the way that it handles the power, the rear-wheel drive driving dynamics, etc., this is just more composed, more polished than the Volvo. But the Volvo can be more fun because it's quite simply faster than this. On the grip level, though, this is also superior. We have wider tires in the back, slightly narrower tires up front, but the curb weight is a little bit lighter depending on the trim level you're looking at. Of course, we also have a smaller battery in this vehicle. Thanks to the general design of the 3 Series and this particular model with the bigger brakes and the grippier tires, etc., the braking score is definitely solid at 116 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0. And the braking feel is definitely excellent. The blended braking system transitions between regen braking and friction braking very nicely. There isn't a moment where nothing happens, so if I just stab this a little bit quicker, we get a pretty decent response from the braking system, and the braking feel is definitely strong and linear. But we do get a little bit of a different kind of regen feel than you'll find in some hybrids, because of course the power is going back through the 8-speed automatic transmission. So as I'm slowing down with the regen braking here, you'll notice the transmission is downshifting as you're slowing down. It's a little bit more pronounced, I would say, in the rear-wheel drive model, and in the rear-wheel drive version of this, just like a rear-wheel drive Tesla, if the road surface is a little bit less than perfect, the traction control system will have to intervene, and that will reduce your regen braking ability. All in all, I would get the all-wheel drive system in the 330e. I think it just fits the personality of the vehicle better. Out on a rough gravel road like the one that we're on here, I'm going to give ride quality an A. I love the way that the adaptive suspension system is tuned in the 3 Series. It's available in the 330i and the 330e both. If you don't get it, then the suspension is going to be a little bit firmer than the softest modes in this vehicle, but if I move this over to Sport, then this is actually going to be a little bit firmer than the standard suspension. Actually, it's pretty similar in terms of its suspension tuning to, say, the M340i in its sporty modes with the adaptive dampers as well. Things get fairly firm. You can definitely feel all the small bumps on this road surface here, but if I just move it back into the electric mode or the hybrid mode where I have it set to the more comfortable suspension suspension tuning, then it soaks up the large and small imperfections fairly well. Keep in mind that the closest direct competitor to this, the S60 T8, does not have adaptive dampers available. If, on the other hand, you want ride quality that's a little bit more comfortable than this, I do think that the current generation C-Class is a bit more comfortable, but no plug-in hybrid is available in this generation C-Class, at least not yet in North America. In my cabin noise testing at 50 miles an hour, I measured 71 decibels in here, putting this about equal with the S60 Recharge, so I'm going to give this the same A- when it comes to the cabin noise score. But there is something you should know. We get a little bit less road noise coming into this cabin than in the Volvo, and you will notice that if you hit potholes or imperfect pavement, that this cabin's going to be a little bit quieter in those situations than the S60. When it comes to fuel economy, I admit to being a little bit torn. Driving this just as a hybrid, not charging the battery at all, I averaged about 28 miles per gallon, which is a little bit above what the EPA says you should get in this all-wheel drive trim. That's pretty logical because we have that big battery pack, so going downhill, I do drive up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass. This is able to recharge all of that energy into the battery, and of course, the non-hybrid 3 Series would just be burning gasoline on its way down the hill. On the other hand, the fuel economy is substantially similar to the Volvo S60 Recharge, but that model is going to give you significantly faster 0 to 60 times, about 1.5 seconds faster. And if you plug it in, it's going to give you about double the electric range, about 41 miles in that model. With this 330e in our electric range test, driving it fairly gently on expressways in Santa Clara County, where the speed limit's about 50 miles an hour, I was able to eke out 21 miles of electric range. Out on the open highway at 70 miles an hour on a level surface, I ended up about 17 miles of electric range. So definitely keep that range difference in mind. The battery pack is not as large, and this is not as efficient in electric-only operation, so your range figures are going to be lower. But it's not going to take as long to charge the battery either. Now that you're convinced that the 330e is the best 3 Series available, you might be wondering how much it will cost. Well, it starts at $44,900. That will get you the rear-wheel drive version. That's $1,100 more than a base 330i. So not a big price increase. And on the average lease payment, it's only going to be about $10 more a month, according to the BMW website, the day that we're shooting this video. If you want all-wheel drive, that's a $2,000 option, just like on the 330i, and again, it's the exact same all-wheel drive system. The options list is very similar to the 330i. You can again get the M Sport package if you want it. That's probably something that I would get on my 330e. It definitely has a positive impact on handling and braking performance in this model. If you're interested in saving gasoline, you probably still want the 330e, even though the EPA numbers are actually a little bit lower on the 330e than the 330i. And here's why. In regular daily driving, where you're doing a mix of highway and a mix of city driving, even if you don't plug it in, this is going to be more efficient because the real-world city mileage is significantly better than the 330i. It will run its air conditioning system, it will drive around in EV mode, just like an average hybrid out there, and that's going to save you an awful lot of gas if you have that blend of city and highway driving. If you're just doing open highway driving, and that's 90 to 100% of your driving window, then this is going to be a little bit less efficient than the 330i. On the other hand, if you have the ability to plug it in at home, it's only going to take about 10 to 11 hours to charge, even on a 120 volt outlet, and you will shift a decent portion of your fuel consumption over to electricity, and you'll probably end up saving more than $10 a month, which could make this a little bit less expensive than the 330i. Then there's the reality that in some states you get additional state and local incentives, which could end up making this a bit less expensive. So if you, for instance, live in a state where your utility company will give you maybe a $500 or $1,000 credit, maybe your state has a $500 incentive for some sort of charging infrastructure at home, that could level out the price tag between this and the 330i, and then you're still saving a couple bucks a month on the fuel. But how does it compare to its most direct competitor in the US, the S60 Recharge? The S60 Recharge will give you significantly greater range. It's more efficient, it has a bigger battery, it will go 41 miles on electric only, and then give you about the same kind of fuel economy as this after the battery has been exhausted, but you also get 455 horsepower and a 0 to 60 time that's about 4 seconds. So it's almost as fast as a 340i, while giving you the same sort of fuel economy as this. Now, the downside is that even though the S60 is built in North America, it does not appear to qualify for any portion of the federal tax credit either. And it's $6,300 more expensive than the 330e because of that level of performance. I do like the front end design a little bit more on the Volvo than the BMW. I like the back end design of the BMW more than the Volvo. I like iDrive 8 more than Volvo's infotainment system. The Volvo is getting a software update recently that will add the CarPlay-like functionality we find in the instrument cluster to the new S60, but we don't know exactly when that's going to be available in North America. It's currently available only in Europe. The S60 is a bit roomier in the back seat, even though the legroom figures don't appear too far off. The back seat is going to be more comfortable for taller drivers, and the battery, even though it's in the middle of the vehicle, occupies a little bit less space in the footwells versus the transmission tunnel here. Even though the numbers would not appear to support this, the cargo area is very comparable between the two models. You can fit about the same kind of luggage in either model. I find the seats in the Volvo to be a little bit more comfortable, but I think the dashboard styling of the 330e is a little bit more modern and a little bit more my taste. If I were to sign on the dotted line with my own money, I might lean towards the S60 because its plug-in hybrid system is so fast and definitely still very efficient. Also, that longer EV range would mean that I could drive the S60 both ways from home to work and back and forth, only on electricity. So if you really want to reduce your gasoline consumption, the S60 is going to be better at that than the 330e. But this is more fun, I would say, on your favorite winding mountain road. The S60 is definitely very quick, but the handling is not as sharp as this. Sometimes the heavy battery in the back can make this feel a little bit rear-end heavy. You can definitely feel a little bit of a pendulum swing going on back there that you don't get in the S60. But the S60 has 300 horsepower and about 300 pound-feet of torque on the front axle. So there's definitely more torque steer. It's definitely not the same kind of driving dynamic we have in the 3 Series. Let me know what you would pick if your own cash were on the line. Again, keep in mind that Volvo is $6,300 more expensive, but obviously it's going to win the stoplight race every time versus this 330e. If you want to win the stoplight race in your 3 Series, of course, there are 2 different versions that are going to be faster than that Volvo. The 340i is going to be faster, as is the M3. Of course, there's the M3 competition if you want to go even bonkers or even more bonkers than the M3 already. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and I'll see all of you next week.